Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I'm here to take a look at the Magic Origins 2-player Clash Pack for Magic the Gathering. The decks are called Armed and Dangerous, the Armed deck being a green and white deck, and the Dangerous one being a white, black, and green deck. And as you can see, the box has taken a little damage in storage, but I'm sure the contents are going to be fine. On the back it says 2 ways to clash. Take on a friend. This clash pack contains 2 ready-to-play decks for you and a friend to test yourselves in battle, or combine for the ultimate weapon. Next, select the best of both decks to create a powerful deck ready for your next Friday Night Magic tournament. The contents include 2 ready-to-play 60-card decks, including 6 premium cards with new artwork, strategy insert with tips for building the ultimate tournament deck, deck box, and Magic Rules reference card. Let's go ahead and take a look at the contents. There's a rules reference card. This is circa Magic Origins and contains the standard information that has been on these rules reference cards for many years now. Very useful for new players who need a reminder of the different aspects of playing Magic, but that's going to be who it is for. Fortunately, I think that this is what this particular product is for as well. Alright, this is our strategy insert, which comes with deck list, which is important for this product if you want to separate the combined deck back out into the separate decks. And then we have information on how to play each of these decks, so that's pretty good. I like that the strategy actually tells you cards to look out for and how to play the deck, as opposed to giving you a really vague direction on what the deck is trying to do. So these are what the current strategy inserts should have been and are not. On the back, it tells you a little bit about how to build a proper 60-card deck, but if you're not really looking to try to think about that yourself, it does give you an actual deck list that you can combine these 2 decks into, complete with sideboard, which is important for tournaments and events, which it tells you a little bit more about here. And so I like that this is all here in one large strategy insert. And we have a card divider here to divide the 2 decks in the box. This is the deck box itself. It is made of relatively thin cardstock, but it does have artwork and the name of the deck, so that's something. It probably won't hold sleeves. Yeah, it holds just the deck and the strategy insert, and that's it. And so can't expect to put sleeved cards in here, but I guess you can get another deck box for that purpose. Now to take a look at the decks. Alright, this is the 3-color deck. Alright, those are the 2 decks. Now that I have taken a look at them all, I'm going to sleeve them up. I'll play them against each other, and then I will combine them and play them against the other Clash packs that Wizards of the Coast has produced, and then I'll come back and let you know what I think about the product as a whole. So let's talk about Armed first. Armed is very much the renowned deck. It is just all over the deck list here. The payoffs being the renowned cards themselves. The strongest payoffs are probably the Valorant Wardens, which draws you a card when your creatures get renowned, but you have a lot of cards that are going to just get strong on their own just by hitting your opponent and becoming renowned. That composes the majority of the cards. Amongst the creatures here, I think that there are some weaknesses, of course, that could be shored up. The cards that don't really help this project include the Dragon Hunter, the Dromoka Warrior, Seeker of the Way, Dragon Bell Monk, and the complement of spells I think works fine for the deck. The Epic Confrontations are probably the weaker picks here because the deck is a bit more aggressive and the creatures are a little bit smaller, especially before they become renowned. And so unless they become renowned, the Epic Confrontations are going to feel a bit weaker, especially against a deck with bigger creatures. But there are some big creatures here, like the Outland Colossus, that gets huge when it is able to connect and become renowned. Although, I mean, if that thing is able to connect once to become renowned, I'm not sure that the opponent has legs for making it all the way to the end of the game here. The Anointer of Champions is a good pick for this particular deck because it does give the attacking creature, preferably the renowned creature, a +1/+1, possibly being able to push that through. And the aggressive nature of the deck, as you can see from the high amount of 2-drops, means that it is fairly fast. To that end, I think that the mana base is somewhat reasonable to not have too many tap lands. I am grateful for the 1 Windswept Heath that's in there. I think there should be 4 Windswept Heaths in here total, because that would help the deck's plan of being very fast and aggressive. But that is not what's in here, and I do think that the deck could have better consistency by increasing the numbers of rares and removing the cards that just don't really lean towards its game plan. I think the most important one of these to add more of would be Honored Hierarchs, because if you don't draw one of these early, then it's really just going to become a 1/1 and not be especially good. And so the card should either not be here at all, or it should be in multiples. But I understand that as a rare, that's not going to happen too often for Wizards of the Coast pre-constructed decks of this era. Overall, I do think that the deck is powerful just because of how speedy it is. It also has the Collected Company, which is a nice way of throwing a couple bodies onto the battlefield in a hurry. And so while the deck could use some improvement and it would be stronger, and it's not really gonna make any headway at Friday Night Magic, I think that it plays well against its included opponent and should be okay in Kitchen Table Magic. I think some quick upgrades would help it a lot. Now let's talk about Dangerous. So Dangerous's main theme here is Outlast from the Khans of Tarkir format. I think that it's also really just a +1/+1 theme with a little bit of Outlast to help support it. And the payoffs for all those +1/+1s are not only the Outlast uncommons, which give all creatures with +1/+1 a new attribute, but it also benefits the Lightwalker, which can fly, and then all your creatures are just bigger, and so there's a benefit there. The synergy between the creatures in the deck is pretty cool. And I like that you don't have to necessarily Outlast with this deck in order to get the benefits, because there are plenty of spells in this deck that also put +1/+1 counters on your creatures, notably the Cash Defenses, the Skill Blessing, the Dromoka's Gift, the Incremental Growth, Map the Waste, Abzan, Ascendancy, and Citadel Siege. And the Ancestral Vengeance even puts a +1/+1 counter on your creatures. And so this is a way of getting the benefits of the uncommons without having to spend a turn tapping for Outlast, which turns out to be on the slow side. And the deck is obviously a little bit more on the slow side because of the need to tap at sorcery speed for Outlast, and as well as the mana base, which has a bunch of Gainlands and a Sandstep Citadel. The need to accommodate 3 colors does slow this deck down quite a bit, and most of the cards in black are not actually that good in this deck. And I think the deck could have been improved by removing black altogether, but I do understand that the plan is to have Abzan and Ascendancy in this deck, and so you have the redundancy of having your creatures die and turning into 1/1s, which is a really cool effect, and I think it's really strong. But I do wonder if the deck's consistency would have been improved by removing black altogether, since most of the deck is white and green. Now, the deck's consistency is also weakened just a little bit by some of the creature choices here, and really I'm mostly just talking about the Siege Rhino, which is a good card, but at the same time it doesn't really play into the themes of the deck at all. And so I think it being replaced by something a little bit more appropriate to the deck's end goal would lead the deck to feeling like it's playing better. And also finding other cards for the mana base that are not tap lands could have improved the deck significantly as well, but that would mean that we're getting fetch lands, and that would probably not work. I think the non-creature spells are an interesting mix. I do wonder if this deck needs so many bolster effects, especially when the Dromoka's Gift costs 5, and so you have to hold your mana up in order to use it as a combat trick if that's what you're trying to do, and then you can get blown out while trying to use Dromoka's Gift anyways. And so part of me thinks that perhaps the Dromoka's Gift should have been replaced by cheaper cards that grant counters. Now, the deck obviously would have been greatly improved by more Citadel Sieges and Abzan Ascendancies. I think that it would have been important for this deck to be able to hold its own. I do like that there is some removal at 2 to help keep the deck alive until its counters are placed and the creatures get bigger. But I think that the slowness of the deck, alongside the lack of ways of spreading counters about broadly, make the deck feel just a little bit clunky at times. But I do still think that it can be fun for anyone who is able to get the deck going and accomplishing its things. I just think that the pure +1/+1 counter cards like Cash Defenses, Dromoka's Gift, and Incremental Growth maybe needed to be replaced by cards with a little bit more utility attached to them, especially the sorcery speed ones. And so, while I think that this can be fun, I do think that this is probably the weakest of the Clash Pack decks altogether because of the inability for the deck to really surprise anyone. The combined deck leans pretty obviously into a shared theme between both decks, which is the +1/+1 counter theme. The round creates +1/+1 counters, and the other cards just generate +1/+1 counters without any specific mechanic. And so that part of the deck works out reasonably well. I do think that there is a little bit of disconnect between Renown and +1/+1 counters, because some of the Renown benefits care about being Renowned specifically and don't care about the +1/+1 counters. And so that part is a little bit irregular, but I don't think that that makes the counter theme not work. And there are some great payoffs for the counters aside from just your creatures getting bigger. For example, the Lightwalkers do well holding counters so that they can fly, and then you also have the Abzan Ascendancy, and then you also have the Honored Hierarch, which will be able to tap for mana should you be able to get it Renowned. Now, there are some weaknesses also to this deck that I think make it a little annoying at times. And one of these weaknesses is that, first of all, despite being a very aggressive deck, there's only one Honored Hierarch here, and this is the kind of card that you need multiples of in order to be able to play them early and then get that benefit of being able to tap for a mana of any color, which is important to this deck in some ways because the deck's curve leans it towards being a very aggressive deck. But one of the problems with the deck is that it has a ton of tap lands in the deck, and of course as a 3-color deck it makes sense that you're going to need some tap lands to make that work, but it means that the lands slow down the deck significantly. And I think the deck actually boasts one fetch land in the Windswept Heath. I think the deck should have just had much more fetch lands in it. Obviously that is a lot of rares being added to a deck, and this is a Wizard of the Coast Precon from this era, and so they wouldn't really want to do that anyways because it would make the deck too valuable, and especially fetch lands being one of the most expensive types of lands that you can purchase. And so I think that I understand why it's not there, but it does really wreck the consistency of the deck. And the deck's consistency does struggle a little bit at times because there are some cards here that don't really play into the deck's themes. The really obvious ones being like the Dragon Hunter, the Dromoka Warrior, the Siege Rhino, among other cards. And the Siege Rhino is a really strong card, so I'm not saying that it shouldn't be in this deck, but I do wonder why this deck doesn't end up with like other cards that were in these sets that were more important for decks like these, like a copy of Hardened Scale Summer. And maybe that's because the card ended up being too valuable to be put into this deck, but I think that it is certainly going to be a better pick than playing the Cash Defenses that are already in this deck. And so I think that that is one of the ways that this deck could be improved. It is not going to handle a Friday Night Magic bout especially well, especially because you're playing cards like Lightwalker and Top and Freeblade to try to get in there and win. Ultimately, I found personally that taking turns off to cast cash defenses and incremental growth were just not happening that frequently unless I was already so far ahead that I was going to be able to put away the game. And so I think that the deck could have used some kind of improvements in order to make it a little bit more consistent, particularly with the rares. For example, having 3 of the Anaphen's Tree Spirit, it will die, and so having 3 of it is not bad for a legendary, would help it bolster all of the cards that are going to come in after it. Some of the cards could be replaced. For example, Seeker of the Way is a good strong card, but it doesn't fit into the themes of the deck and could easily be replaced by another Undercity Troll, another Top Freeblade, another Citadel Castellan. I think all of those would be better. The Dromoka Warrior could be replaced by another Lightwalker that would actually improve its status as well. And so all of these things need to be considered for making this deck feel more consistent, especially if you are going to limit the number of rares that this deck has. Now, it does also happen to boast the Collected Company, which is a very strong spell that can grab some of these 2-drops out of the blue. Could there have been more 3-drops to take advantage of the existence of Collected Company? I think so. I think that it would have made the deck feel better, and it's not like you were getting any amazing cards from Collected Company with this particular deck anyways. And then there's the sideboard, and some of the payoffs for the counters exist in the sideboard, like the Abzan Falconers and the Elite Scale Guard and the Abzan Battle Priest. And so it is an interesting choice to have those in there and then have other cards that I don't think are particularly strong sideboard cards in general, like the Anointer Champions or the Mighty Leaps. And so I do wonder at how the sideboard is composed and sometimes when to put things in from the sideboard. I think that that would have been really helpful to have that on that instruction sheet for the Clash Pack. So the Armed and Dangerous Clash Pack can actually do some things. I think that as an aggro deck, it is unique amongst the Clash Packs for being so focused on getting there and swinging and accomplishing the win in a hurry. And I think one of these 2 decks actually overpowers the other deck as a result of it, which is the Renown deck. If Dangerous isn't able to get its counters distributed in a hurry and put a blocker down, I think the Renown deck will just run over the other deck. And these decks have less interaction with each other than previous decks, which makes the sideboard feel significantly weaker too when you combine them together. And so I think that it is a choice that the designers made in order for the themes that crossed between the Tarkir block and Origins to work synergistically. And I think that that's why both decks ended up on +1/+1 counters. But it does make both decks feel a little bit shallow, and it does mean that the decks don't really fight against each other especially that well. I think that they can still be fun. The promise of Dangerous, I think, doesn't quite live up to the execution of it because it just will die so quickly before it's able to get its value up and running overall. And so I think that this might be one of the weaker of the Clash Packs as a result of the lack of interactivity between the decks and the decks being too similar, and then finally one of the decks seemingly being stronger than the other one of the decks. And so that makes this weaker. I do think that the combined deck is still fairly good, just not quite as good as its predecessors in Clash Packs. And then this also marks the final Clash Pack. Wizards abandoned the product after this, and though I don't know why, I think that the product is clever in the sense that you can get 2 players to just pick up one of these boxes, play it against each other, and then also have whoever bought this box be able to combine the cards together and take it to a higher powered, still kitchen table-y format. And I think that the fact that it asks you to put the decks together and build the sideboard really does teach you a little bit more about playing Magic the Gathering than your average pre-con of this era. So that is my thoughts about the Armed and Dangerous Clash Pack for Magic Origins. Let me know your thoughts about these decks and the combined decks if you've had any experience with this in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.